I believe that's because they wanted the war, because we were in a depression, and that was the only way they saw to get out of that depression.
We will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
Roosevelt deliberately did not inform the people at Pearl Harbor that they were going to be attacked, but he did send his more valuable ships out to sea to save them and left the junks at Pearl Harbor.
The people of the United States have already formed their opinions.
And Roosevelt kept everybody in the dark because he needed that atrocity to go to war in Europe to make the money that the bankers wanted to make.
So whether it's a matter of contriving atrocities or simply letting them happen, a few suspicious minds think the US government's got form. Maybe then it's no surprise that some campaigners just don't buy the official 9/11 story.
So Nick, you're down here every weekend campaigning, but what for?
Right, we've been here every week since January 2004 to stop the 9/11 cover-up.
And what is the 9/11 cover-up? What are they covering up?
Well, if you take a look at the facts of the day itself, you will see that there is a giant mass of questions that have not been dealt with in any of the official investigations. That Bush and his entourage do not react in the school, that Rumsfeld does not react in the Pentagon, by their own admission. They stay wherever they were and do nothing. Now, what we also find out is that the standard operating procedures for hijackings are not actually carried out on the day.
What are they? What are the standard?
Well, normally, once a plane is diverted from its course, or if it can't be hailed for 5 minutes, the FAA is supposed to turn that over to the U.S. Air Defense System, which is supposed to scramble jets.
So there should have been jets up there.
This is theoretically supposed to happen within minutes, but there's no explanation for how it doesn't happen in the 90 minutes that it took before the Pentagon itself was hit.
But couldn't they just be, you know, to coin a lovely British phrase, just covering their asses? By saying, right, we didn't launch any jets, you know, we obviously should have, and then the next day they're saying, well, they didn't tell us, you know, the FAA, it's their fault.
Well, there we go. If they are covering their asses, then somebody has to be held accountable.
Washington defense journalist Wayne Madsen says the authorities' failure to provide answers just adds fuel to the conspiracy fire.
The fact no one was held accountable, people will say, see, you know, nobody lost their job over it, you know, were they in on some sort of secret deal? And unfortunately, when there's no accountability, it's going to lend to that rumor mill.
But the conspiracy theorists are making some remarkable leaps to support their accounts.
One error that they make again and again is that they overestimate the competency of governmental institutions. And if planes are not deployed at the right base in the right amount of time, they have to say, aha, there's a reason for this, other than the fact that maybe it was just one god darn big screw up.
Take the issue of whether some government agencies knew in advance about the 9/11 attacks. This can be made to sound like a cynical disregard of human life. It could just as well be a massive intelligence failure.
Some of the foreign intelligence coming into this country clearly indicated airplanes were going to be used, buildings were a target. In fact, New York City was a target. Washington, D.C. was a target. So I think one of the biggest unanswered questions is, how was this intelligence treated, or was this as a result of an age-old problem with the U.S. intelligence and law enforcement community that if it's not invented here, it's not worth acting upon?
There are numerous stories about key staff being pre-warned and ordered to stay away from New York.
On the night of September 10th, and this is admitted, it's been in the San Francisco Chronicle and the Associated Press, Mayor Willie Brown got a call from the White House telling him not to fly on a scheduled trip to New York that morning. But it's not just Mayor Willie Brown. The Times of London reported that Salman Rushdie was banned, quote, for his safety, from flying to New York for the month of September by the FAA.
There are questions too about the 19 Arab hijackers. The conspiracy theorists are not convinced about the evidence against them, or even that they existed at all.
We have never been given any convincing evidence that these particular 19 men or any other 19 Middle Eastern men were on board those planes. Therefore, there is no reason to conclude that that's what really happened.
So after the terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers, they found proof, didn't they, of who had perpetrated it?
Well, I really have to question some of the proof that they claim to have found. The very first piece of evidence they claim to have found was a passport of one of the hijackers on American Airlines 11, which crashed into the North Tower here. They say they found within minutes of the crash on the ground. Now, everyone should recall what the scene was like. Everyone knows these pictures, of those first moments. How is it possible that this just floated straight out of the plane, survived the fire, and hit just the right spot where it was found? This sounds to me like planted evidence.
Suspicions weren't quelled when the government released the 19 names and pictures of the hijackers days after the attacks. But as the men named weren't revealed on the airline passenger lists, the conspiracy rumour mill went into internet overdrive.
Even the BBC has reported that at least 7 of the 19 hijackers have been proven to be alive. Then the FBI says, oh, we just got the names wrong.
Of the 19 alleged hijackers, 8 of those names have been found alive in other countries.
Well, maybe. But this, of course, could also show that the hijackers were adept at stealing identities. Other witnesses say they saw the men boarding the planes.
Now, some people speculated from that immediately that no Arabs were aboard the plane, but I did, again, footwork. I talked to ground crew on Flight 77 who ticket and go on the plane and count, but they don't take off with it, and they saw some of the pictured people get on the plane that day.
Lead hijacker Mohammed Atta was captured on Air Force CCTV cameras on the morning of 9/11. Up to then, he seemed an unlikely Muslim radical. For months before the attacks, he lived along the coast of Florida, where he and another hijacker trained at an American flight school. Local newspaper reports claimed their lifestyle was more like that of rock stars than religious fundamentalists.
Mohammed Atta was a kind of Islamic fundamentalist that was sticking $20 bills down the panties of infidel women all up and down the coast of Florida and in New York City and other places as well. So it did not make sense that he would come here to go to school.
They certainly weren't devout Muslims. If they were devout Muslims, they wouldn't have been snorting cocaine and in strip clubs the night before.
If he's not a fanatic Islamic fundamentalist, the question is, who is he?
So there are reasons to doubt whether he was an agent for Osama bin Laden. And from there, you get claims he wasn't involved in the attacks at all.
The single biggest hole, I think, is the immediate claim that somehow Osama bin Laden was responsible. Although the government and the American media immediately began saying that Osama bin Laden was responsible maybe within minutes, maybe within hours at the most of the tragedies in New York and the Pentagon, they weren't providing us any real evidence, just a lot of speculation.
I think there are thousands of people who know who is responsible for 9/11, and it's not Osama bin Laden.
So based on the evidence, or the lack of it, the hardcore of doubters think Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with 9/11, and neither did the 19 Arab hijackers. Now, it's easy to see how things can get out of control when you don't know all the facts. But if those 19 people didn't do it, then who did?
Much of the Middle East is a land of smoke and mirrors. When something seems obvious, the opposite is often true. Some see the mirror image of the Arab hijackers in the corners and corridors of Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service.
There is wide-ranging evidence of an Israeli network of spies operating here in the United States over a long period of time, who were infiltrating U.S. government installations and private corporations. These young people were Israeli intelligence operatives posing as art students. There's evidence that some of these Israeli quote-unquote art students were actually living across the street from Mohammed Atta.
In a world of uncertainty, one fact is pretty certain. If Mossad did have anything to do with it, no one's going to say so. And when an organisation is as secretive as they are, you can accuse them of pretty much anything.
I tend to think that it was largely Mossad orchestrated and that there were probably a few people in key positions in the government, in sensitive positions, who were bought off or blackmailed. I mean, that's frankly what I think. Yeah, I mean, it's a very simple process.
There's no evidence that the Israelis or Mossad, their secret service, had anything to do with it. And this is one of those areas that whenever there's a major disaster, some of the conspiracy theories that immediately erupt are anti-Semitic, anti-Israel conspiracy theories. There's a long tradition of this in the United States from the far right, people who suspect that, you know, Jews run the world. This is one of those crazy and racist theories. It's very dangerous, and 9/11 was no different. These theories immediately popped up.
But at the core of the 9/11 conspiracy theories is the idea that members of the American establishment, up to the highest levels of government, had something to do with the plot, or at least knew about it in advance.